Who can do this? It's a hard saying, isn't it? You see, because, friend, God doesn't want 95%. Doesn't want 10%, 20%. You give God 10% and He's not interested, and that's a fact. Doesn't want that. He's not impressed by 50% or 75%. And I'll tell you the reason why. It's because He doesn't need it, and His people don't either. He doesn't need it, and His people don't either. It's amazing to me. It's been happening more and more that when we go out and share the gospel with people, how they want to give us money. Knock on a door and somebody says, well, I don't know if I can come to your church, but I'll give you a donation. And we tell them we don't want your money. We don't mean to be unkind about it. We say you can't. Well, couldn't I just write you a check and you could take it to church? No, ma'am, I won't do that. No, sir, I can't do that. You got to take it yourself. Because we don't need money in Fort Lauderdale Baptist Church. Listen, our problem's not money. Our problem's spiritual, folks. Our problem is not lack of physical possessions. God doesn't lack anything. Our problem is lack of consecration. You give God 100% of what you have, and God will have the same amount that He possesses anyway. He bought you with a price, and the allocation of your funds is really insignificant with regards to what God has. You know, that emboldens me as I preach. We're deliberate in our church so that I don't know what our finances are with regard to individuals. I know what our bank account is like, what our deposits are, and whether we can pay the bills. But I don't know who gives what, and I'll tell you why. It doesn't matter. And I'm never afraid somebody will leave our church and not give anymore. Because I don't know if they give anyway. They probably don't. I don't think anybody who gives has ever left our church. I really don't. I've never seen our finances affected by somebody leaving. And you know, we have to be like that in order to have God's power in our lives and our preaching. It's true. Christian, get over thinking that you've got something God needs. We've got need of something God has, and that's His power. We needed to be saved, and we still need God's grace. Saved by it, we need to walk in it, and we need to depend on Him for it. And you can hang on to some possession instead, but it'll never satisfy, and God doesn't need it to pay your bills. God doesn't need it to pay your bills. While does it remain? Was it not thine own? After his soul, was it not in thine own power? Why hast thou conceived this thing in thine heart? Thou hast not lied unto men, but unto God. Religion imitates. God's power is renewed at prayer, and the result of it is powerful preaching, is 100% surrender, and the result of it is many times great discernment. The result of an individual being religious, even at great sacrifice, is simply that it imitates God's power. In other words, it tries to look like the real thing, but it's not. It's not. And here's a generous giver. By the way, lots of infidels are generous. Do you know most of the billionaires in the world, by the end of their lifetime, oftentimes give everything they have away? They realize they can't take it with them, and they just give it away. You know, most billionaires don't even leave that much to their heirs. Most of the time they try to start a charity or a foundation and just give billions. They're very generous. And that's an imitation. That's an imitation of spirituality. And you know that many individuals give to churches in an imitation of spirituality. But there's a God who knows and tries the hearts. And there's a difference between religion and spirituality. There's a difference between being generous in your strength and having God's power. Let's finish up by saying this. Religion brings a curse. Religion brings a curse. The curse of religion, I believe, is that you'll be deceived by your religion, and it'll destroy you. You know what Satan wants? He wants you to be deceived long enough to go into hell. He wants you to be deceived long enough to go into hell if you're lost. And you know what he wants if you're saved? He wants you to be deceived enough to do something other than have God's power. For the lost person, he wants you to be deceived long enough to go to hell. For the believer, he wants you to be deceived long enough that you go through life without God's power. That's what Satan desires for you. And that's an imitation of religion. It's an imitation of religion. And it brings God's curse. The last thing we see about religion is that there is within religion a stubborn refusal to see and to do right. There's a stubborn refusal to recognize and do right. See, what was it that Barnabas had done? Wasn't an action, was it? Could Barnabas have given a portion of that which he had from selling his land and become a self-supported missionary? Sure. And if God had led him to, I believe he would have. But what Barnabas did was sold a possession and gave it. You know, Ananias and Sapphira could have done the same thing. They could have just been genuine. They could have been real. But there is about an individual who wants the glory for himself and not for God. An attitude that says, no, this is how I'm going to do it. God, this is what you can have from me. You can have this and you can have this, but I'm going to have my security. And that can be all kind of different things. Do you know what you think you're doing with that attitude? You think that you're tipping God. You think that you can offer God a tip. God, I could really dress up that church. I could make it look really good. I could bring in a better quality of clientele. I could get a class of people there that would be much more impressive and could get a lot more good things done. And God's got all the power. And He's offering it to us and saying, this is what you need. Christians say, well, what we need to get a good program for ministering to this group of people. We need to reach those golfers, and we need to reach the hunters, and we need to reach the children, and we need to reach the families, and we need to reach the singles. And we need to do, and we need to do, and we need to do. And God says, well, I could just empower you to preach the gospel and everybody would be reached. Religion stubbornly refuses God's way. And do you know what the problem at Fort Lauderdale Baptist Church is? The problem is we don't have God's power like we ought to. The problem isn't, Pastor, you know, if you were just a little bit nicer. It'd be nice if Pastor was a little nicer. And he's working on that. Pastor, you know, if you could be just a little more diplomatic and just compromise a few things, not important things, but if you could just compromise a few things, then, you know, people would come and they'd stay and they wouldn't leave. Or, you know, if we could, you know, if we just had a ministry that could, and friend, I want to just tell you something. Disney World knows about getting things done that way. And they're good at it. But they don't have God's power. And there are all kind of churches that are excellent at growth methods. But they don't have God's power.